The small alien girl sat in the corner of the dimly lit chamber, her body trembling as shadows from the human loomed across the walls of the cell. She had been told all her short life that humans were predators, that they hunted smaller species, not for resources or survival, but for pleasure. She remembered the whispered stories from her elders about how humans had teeth like knives and eyes that glowed with hunger. And now fate had placed her directly into the grasp of the very monster. She had feared. She kept her large, luminous eyes locked on the figure sitting quietly near the metal door. His massive frame, compared to her small, fragile form, made her heart pound like a drum. He was silent, his head bowed, his broad shoulders rising and falling with calm breath. She expected growls or cruel taunts, but instead he said nothing. The silence was unbearable for her. She clutched her tiny claws against her chest as though shielding herself from being snatched away. She thought at any moment he would lunge across the room and tear into her with those powerful hands. But minutes passed and he still did not move. Finally, curiosity battled with fear. She tilted her head just slightly enough to see his face and was surprised to find no glowing eyes, no fangs bared in hunger. Instead, his expression seemed distant, almost sad. When his gaze finally lifted and met hers, she flinched, waiting for the strike, but the human only sighed and reached into a pouch at his side. He pulled out a small container, pressed a button, and the faint smell of cooked food filled the air. Her stomach betrayed her with a low growl, and shame burned her cheeks. The human noticed, but said nothing. He simply set the container on the ground and pushed it toward her before leaning back against the wall. She could not believe what she was seeing. This was a trick. It had to be. She shook her head violently, whispering to herself that she could not eat the bait, that if she did, he would pounce, but the scent filled the room and the ache in her belly made her dizzy. Minutes stretched longer until at last she crept forward, one step then another, her eyes never leaving his hands. The human remained still, watching, but making no move. When she reached the food she snatched, it quickly scurried back and began nibbling with cautious bites. It tasted real. It was not poisoned. At least not yet. The human closed his eyes as though resting. She studied him between bites, waiting for signs of attack. But none came. Instead, she noticed how worn his uniform looked, how scars crossed the skin of his hands, and how his chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. This was not the image of a wild devourer. This was something else, something she did not yet understand. When the food was gone, she dared to whisper, "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was high and fragile. She expected no reply, but his eyes opened and he answered softly, "Because you are hungry." She blinked, stunned by the simplicity of the words. There was no menace, no hidden meaning, just calm honesty. She could not accept it, not yet. It clashed too strongly with everything she had ever been told, so she hugged her knees and looked away. Hours passed in uneasy silence. When the door finally opened, 2 alien guards peered in. Glaring at the human, one barked something in a harsh tongue, then tossed a bundle onto the floor before slamming the door shut again. The human picked up the bundle, unwrapped it, and found a thin blanket. He shook it once, then set it down beside her. She gasped, pulling back, but he said quietly, "It is cold." And then, without another word, he went back to his side of the cell and sat down. The girl could not sleep at first, her mind racing with questions. Was this all a trick to lower her guard? Or was he truly different from the stories? Slowly, warmth from the blanket soothed her shivers and exhaustion dragged her eyes shut as she drifted off. The last thing she saw was the human still sitting watchful, his gaze not on her but on the door, as though he expected danger to come from outside rather than from her. In the dark quiet, she realized that perhaps the human was not planning to devour her after all. But something deep inside whispered that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The next day began with the rumble of distant engines and the sound of heavy boots echoing through the metal corridors outside the cell. The little alien girl woke, startled, her small body trembling. As she wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, the human was already awake, crouched near the door, his sharp eyes scanning every sound. He looked less like a predator waiting to strike and more like a soldier waiting for orders. When the door opened again, it was not the guards from before, but a taller figure wearing silver armor, a high-ranking officer from her people. He sneered at the sight of the human and barked commands. 2 guards entered, grabbing both of them and forcing them out of the cell into a narrow hallway. The girl whimpered, expecting the human to resist or lash out, but he simply walked calmly, his wrists bound behind his back. His face unreadable, the group marched through twisting corridors until they reached a landing platform outside. The light of twin suns blazed across the sky, blinding her. For a moment she saw ships rising and falling above a sprawling alien base, and at the far end, a transport vessel waiting with its hatch open. The guards shoved them inside, sealing the hatch with a hiss. Inside the transport, the girl sat opposite the human across a row of metal benches. The ship vibrated as it lifted from the ground. She stared at him, trying to understand his silence. Why did he not fight? Why did he not show the rage or hunger she had always believed his kind carried when the engines leveled into steady hum? She dared to ask, "Where are they taking us?" His answer was calm. Maybe to another camp, maybe to a trial, maybe to nowhere. She hugged herself, shivering at the thought. Hours passed in tense quiet. The only sounds were the hum of engines and the occasional clatter of guards outside the cabin. Her stomach twisted again, but this time the human produced nothing to share. He, too, seemed weary. His eyes half closed, yet his body remained tense, every muscle ready. When the ship jolted suddenly, both of them nearly tumbled from their seats. Alarms blared, red lights flashing through the cabin. Something had gone wrong outside. The hull trembled from an impact. The girl screamed, clutching the bench, while the human moved instantly, crouching before her, shielding her with his body. Another blast shook the ship. Voices shouted in panic as the vessel tilted and began to descend. Rapidly through the viewport, flashes of fire streaked the sky raiders. The human muttered under his breath. The girl trembled even more. She had heard of raiders, merciless scavengers who cared little for prisoners or laws. The ship crashed into rough ground, tossing them hard against the walls. Smoke filled the cabin, and the guards scrambled to open the hatch. Chaos erupted outside the crash site as raiders swarmed, firing energy weapons. The human broke free of his bonds in the confusion. His movements, swift and practiced, one guard raised a weapon at him, but with a sudden strike the human disarmed him, using the very rifle to fire back before tossing it aside. He grabbed the girl, pulling her close. "Run," he commanded, and though her legs felt weak, she obeyed, following as explosions shook the air together. They darted through shattered debris, the girl gasping for breath while the human never let go of her small arm. They ducked behind a fallen piece of hull, the human scanning the field, his face grim. He muttered something about the raiders closing in and their slim chance of survival. He looked at her, eyes wide with terror, then surprised her by saying, "Stay behind me. Do not stop, no matter what happens." She nodded, trembling as he surged forward, moving like a force of nature. Every raider who came too close was knocked aside by his fists or thrown back by weapons. He picked from the ground. The girl watched in awe. She had never seen such ferocity yet. It was not the cruelty she feared. It was a fury shaped to protect her. By the time they reached the edge of the field, her chest heaved with exhaustion. The human guided her into the shelter of jagged rocks where the smoke hid them from sight. He crouched down, placing a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her body ached from the run. He nodded. "Good, then we move again soon." But she whispered, "Why did you protect me? Why not leave me?" His eyes softened for the first time. "You are small. You are afraid, but you are alive. That is enough reason." She stared at him, words failing her. The fear inside her warred with a new feeling. Something warmer. Something that made her believe he might not be the monster her people claimed. She clutched the blanket tighter around her small frame, and for the first time since meeting him, she felt a fragile thread of safety in his presence. As the night sky deepened above and the fires of the wreck burned behind them, she realized her journey with this human had only just begun, and it would test everything she thought she knew about his kind and about herself. The smoke from the wreck still rose high into the night sky as the little alien girl sat shivering behind the jagged rocks, the blanket wrapped tightly around her small body. The human stood a few steps away, scanning the horizon. His broad figure, outlined by the glow of distant flames, he looked like a statue of iron, unmoving, except for the slow turn of his head as he listened to the echoes of raider patrols searching the wreckage. She hugged her knees, her heart racing with the thought, that at any moment they could be found. She wanted to ask what would happen if the raiders caught them, but the words stuck in her throat. Finally, the human returned to her side, crouching low, his eyes steady. "We cannot stay here," he said. "They will. Search every inch of the crash site. We have to move before they circle back." She wanted to protest, her legs still weak from running, but the firmness in his voice left no space for argument, so she nodded and rose to her feet. He took her hand, guiding her through the shadows of the rocks, keeping his steps quiet and controlled. His presence gave her strange comfort, even though she had once believed his kind were nothing but devourers of the weak. They moved across rough ground for hours, the girl, stumbling often while the human never once let go of her hand when she fell. He lifted her gently when she slowed. He adjusted his pace so she could keep up. Never scolding, never threatening. His patience confused her more than anything else. She expected harshness, yet received only steady support as they traveled farther from the burning wreck. The sounds of battle faded into silence, replaced by the cries of night creatures and the rustle of wind over barren soil when they finally stopped, near a cluster of hollow trees. The human lowered her to sit and began gathering dry branches. She watched in silence as he built a small fire, shielding the flames with stones, so the light would not carry. Far soon, the warmth reached her chilled bones, and for the first time she felt something close to comfort. She dared to whisper, "Are you not afraid of them hunting us?" He shrugged, feeding another branch to the flames. "Fear will not help us, only caution." Will his calm tone made her chest tighten because she realized he truly believed his words as the fire crackled softly. She studied him in secret. His face was lined with scars, not monstrous as she once imagined, but carved with stories she could not understand. His hands were rough, yet careful, every movement precise. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer than before. "I know you fear me, but I will not harm you." She stiffened, her large eyes wide. He must have read the truth in her silence, because he added, "My people are not the monsters you were told, but I cannot make you believe that. Only my actions can." She looked away, unsure how to respond, but deep inside a seed of doubt about her old beliefs began to grow. The night stretched long and restless. She dreamed of teeth and claws. Yet every time she startled awake, she saw him sitting upright beside the fire, his rifle across his knees, his gaze fixed outward like a guardian. When dawn broke pale light across the barren land, she realized he had not slept at all. He rose, brushing dust from his uniform, and spoke with calm resolve. "We need to find shelter better than this, and water soon, or neither of us will last long." She rose shakily, still clutching the blanket, and followed. Their journey led them across ridges and through valleys where strange creatures prowled. Twice they heard the growls of predators circling, and twice the human placed himself between her and the threat, never backing away. His size and strength made even the beasts hesitate and retreat. The girl could not hide her amazement. She had thought humans dangerous because they destroyed. But now she saw danger turned into protection. Every action of his challenged the image carved into her by her people. By midday, the sun blazed hot, the girl's strength fading quickly. The human noticed without a word, lifting her onto his shoulders as though she weighed nothing. She gasped in shock at first, but soon clung to him, unable to deny the relief of being carried high above the rough ground. He said nothing as he walked, only shifting her slightly to keep her comfortable. His silence was strange, not empty, but heavy with purpose. She began to wonder what pain he carried that made him so quiet. When they finally reached a stream cutting through cracked earth, he lowered her carefully and knelt to drink. Scooping water into his hands, he gestured for her to do the same. She hesitated, remembering the warnings that humans poisoned everything they touched, but thirst overcame fear, and she drank the cool water, spilling down her chin. When she looked at him afterward, expecting a smirk or cruel remark, he only nodded as though satisfied she had survived another small test. That night they rested again by a sheltered ridge. The girl sat close to the fire while the human leaned against a rock, polishing a blade he had taken from the raiders. She dared to ask, "Why do you keep helping me when it slows you down?" His eyes lifted to hers, steady and unflinching. "Because life is not something to discard even when it is small," he replied. His words struck her deeper than she expected. She turned away, hiding the warmth rising in her chest. In that moment, she began to understand something no elder had ever told her. Humans were not terrifying because they devoured. They were terrifying because they endured and because they chose. When to use their strength, the galaxy feared them for the wrong reasons, and she wondered how long it would take before she herself stopped fearing and started trusting. The ridge gave them shelter for a short while, but the human knew they could not remain in one place for long. The raiders would not stop searching, and the base of her people would send out scouts as well. The little, alien girl followed him closely, her small steps quick to match his long strides. She still felt fear, but it was no longer the same kind of fear. It was not the dread of being devoured. It was the fear of losing the one who had kept her safe since the crash. He carried himself with such quiet strength that even when she wanted to collapse, she forced her legs to keep moving. As they reached a wide plain, the human paused, crouching low and gesturing for her to do the same across the open field. A patrol of armed aliens was scanning the horizon, their weapons glinting under the bright sun. The girl recognized them as soldiers from her own people. Her heart leapt with hope for a moment, but then doubt cut deep. If they saw her with the human, what would they think? Would they believe she had been taken as a hostage, or would they brand her a traitor for standing at his side? She looked to the human, expecting him to fight or flee, yet he did neither. Instead, he whispered quietly, "If we are seen, you must choose whether to run to them or stay with me." The words hit her like a heavy weight. She stared at him, trembling, her mouth dry. She thought of the elders who had filled her head with stories of humans tearing children apart. Yet she remembered the fire, the blanket, the food, and the way he carried her when her legs failed. She shook with confusion, unable to answer. The human gave her no pressure. He only watched the patrol until they passed, then signaled for them to continue, moving deeper into the wild. By evening, they reached the cover of a forest. The tall, twisted trees blocked the sky and muffled their steps inside the shadows. The girl felt both comfort and unease. Predators lived here too. Their eyes glimmered in the darkness yet. The human walked forward, steady and sure, as though nothing could shake him when night fell. They stopped near the roots of a massive tree, its hollow trunk providing a shelter against the cold. He set the girl inside first, then gathered branches to build another small fire. As the flames flickered, she found courage to speak, her voice soft. "Why did you say I must choose?" He looked at her quietly for a long moment, then said, "Because one day you will need to decide what you believe, not what they told you. Not what I say, but what you see with your own eyes." She hugged the blanket tighter, confusion swirling inside her. She wanted to cry that it was unfair, but at the same time she knew he spoke the truth. Later that night, when she woke to the sound of footsteps, she saw him standing tall. His rifle raised. Raiders had followed their trail. Figures moved between the trees, their eyes glowing red in the firelight. The human ordered her to stay low, then stepped into the open with the calm of a warrior facing death. The raiders attacked in a frenzy, but he met them with skill, every movement efficient, his fists striking with the force of thunder. When he fired the stolen weapon, the bursts of light tore through the night. She covered her ears, terrified yet amazed at how he fought not to conquer but to shield her. One raider slipped past his guard, rushing toward her, claws raised. She screamed, but the human was faster. He hurled himself between them, taking the blow across his shoulder with a grunt before slamming the raider into the ground. Blood ran down his arm, but he ignored it, driving the rest back into the darkness until silence returned. The fire still flickering weakly, he returned to her side. His face pale but his eyes strong. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You are hurt," she cried. "Why do you do this?" He sat down heavily, wiping the blood with his other hand, because he said in a voice steady, "Even through pain, some things are worth more than pain." The girl crawled closer, pressing the blanket against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding, her small hands trembling. She had never thought she would see herself protecting a human. But the thought of losing him filled her with a fear greater than the fear of him. He let her work without a word, his gaze fixed on the fire. She could not understand why her chest ached so much as she whispered, "You are not like the stories, you are not a monster." He looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen in anyone before. Not hunger, not cruelty, but a quiet sorrow mixed with strength. The rest of the night she stayed awake beside him, watching the shadows beyond the fire, her small form pressed close to his side as though she could keep him safe in return. In her heart a choice was slowly forming, though she did not yet have the courage to speak it. The forest was silent when dawn arrived, mist curling through the branches as the little alien girl blinked awake. She found the human still sitting upright, his face pale from blood loss, yet his eyes alert. He had not slept at all. The wound on his shoulder looked dark and painful, but he showed no sign of weakness. She felt her chest twist, seeing how much he had given to keep her safe. She wanted to tell him to rest, but the words died in her throat because she knew he would refuse. When they began to move again, he did not complain, though every step must have hurt. The girl kept close beside him, afraid that if she looked away he might fall. His strength seemed endless, and yet she could sense how much it cost him. They followed the stream deeper into the forest until the water grew clear and cold. He stopped there, washing the blood from his skin. His teeth clenched against the sting when he caught her watching. He only gave a small nod, as if to say he was fine, but she knew better. They traveled on for hours, the forest giving way to rocky hills where caves dotted the cliffs. The human chose one cave deep and hidden, leading her inside the cool darkness. He lit a small fire again, and finally allowed himself to sit heavily against the stone. His breath came slow and heavy. The girl could not stand seeing him like this, so she gathered herbs she recognized from her people's teachings. She crushed them with small stones and pressed the mixture to his wound. He raised an eyebrow but let her work, his voice low. "You know healing," she answered softly. "Only a little. What the elders taught me for small cuts." He gave a faint smile. "Then it will do." As the hours passed, she watched his face relax slightly, the herbs easing the pain. She felt a strange pride rising inside her, knowing she could give something back after all he had done for her. They spoke little, but when he finally asked, "Why do you still stay with me instead of running to your people?" she froze. The question tore open the thoughts she had avoided. She could imagine the soldiers calling her back, telling her she was safe, but she could also imagine their fury when they saw her defending a human. She looked at him with wide eyes and whispered, "I do not know. Maybe because you saved me. Maybe because I do not want to leave you." His gaze softened, but he said nothing. That night she sat close to him, staring at the fire, and finally asked, "Why are humans so feared?" He was silent for a long moment before answering. "Because we do not break. We bleed. We fall. But we rise again no matter what the galaxy throws at us." They cannot understand that strength, so they twist it into a story that we are monsters. Her heart pounded as she listened. She thought of the stories told in her village and how different his words were. She whispered softly, "But you are not like what they say." And he replied firmly, "None of us are. We fight because we must not, because we hunger." The days that followed tested them further. Food grew scarce, and the journey harder. Yet through every challenge he carried her when she was too weak. He shielded her from storms, and he faced every sound in the night with unshakable courage. The girl began to see him less as the figure of her fear, and more as a guardian who stood against everything that threatened them. She realized that her fear was no longer of being devoured, but of losing him. One evening, as they reached the edge of the forest, they saw lights in the distance, a settlement belonging to her people. Her heart raced. She wanted to run to them to feel safety again. But when she looked at the human, she froze, his face unreadable as he said, "This is where your path and mine may divide. If you choose to go to them, I will not stop you." She gripped the blanket tight, her whole body trembling. She wanted to believe that returning would bring her peace. Yet she could not forget the blood he shed to protect her, nor the nights he kept watch while she slept. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "If I go, they will call me safe. But they will call you monster if I stay. They will call me traitor." He looked at her calmly, then said, "The choice is yours. not theirs. She stared at him, her heart heavy with the weight of decision. She had never been given such freedom before. No, elder, no guard, no voice but her own guiding her. She curled up beside him that night, unable to answer, but deep inside she knew which way her heart leaned as sleep took her. She realized the stories of her people had been wrong. All along, humans were not feared because they devoured. They were feared because they gave their strength to those who had none, and because even broken and wounded they refused to fall. She whispered into the dark so quietly she thought he would not hear, "You are not my monster, you are my protector." And though he said nothing, she saw the faintest smile touch his scarred face before the fire died low. The night passed heavy with silence, broken only by the soft crackle of fire and the steady breath of the human. As he finally allowed himself a few hours of rest, the little alien girl lay awake, staring at the distant lights of her people's settlement. Glowing faintly on the horizon, her mind twisted with fear and longing, she could almost hear the voices of her kin calling her home, telling her to run from the monster who sat beside her. But when she turned her gaze toward him and saw the scars on his face lit by the weak glow, she remembered every moment he had shielded her and carried her through danger. She remembered the blood on his shoulder, shed not to harm her but to save her. When morning came, he stirred awake, rising with slow, heavy movements. Though the pain of his wound was clear, he hid it well. He glanced at her, then at the distant lights, his voice calm. "You must decide soon. The longer we stay near them, the greater the risk." Her small hands clenched around the blanket, her chest tight with conflict. But when she opened her mouth, she found no words, only a trembling whisper. "I'm afraid," he nodded slowly. "Fear is not weakness. Only chains. If you let it bind you, then it wins." They moved closer that day, the path weaving through rocky slopes and shallow valleys. The human led the way, careful with each step, his senses sharp. She followed close, her eyes scanning every shadow. When they reached the ridge above the settlement, they crouched low, watching patrols march in tight formation. Her heart leapt. She saw faces like her own, voices speaking her language, guards carrying banners of her people. Yet, when she thought of walking into their arms, she also saw their suspicion, their anger. If they saw her beside the human, suddenly a patrol spotted movement and shouted. The human grabbed her hand, pulling her back. As weapons, fired energy bolts streaked past, striking rocks with blasts of light. She cried out, but he shielded her again, leading her into the maze of cliffs as soldiers closed in. They ran for hours, the sound of pursuit never far behind, until finally they stumbled into an open clearing where the cliffs gave no cover. The human stopped, raising his rifle and standing tall between her and the patrol that poured into the clearing. The soldiers shouted, demanding she step away from the human. They promised her safety. If she abandoned him, her knees shook as they leveled weapons at his chest. Her heart screamed with terror. This was the moment she had dreaded, the choice placed squarely in her hands. The human turned his head slightly, his voice steady. "If you want to go, then go now. I will not stop you." His eyes burned with calm acceptance, as if he was ready to face death alone. Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to run, but when she looked at him, she saw the nights he stayed awake guarding her, the pain he endured, the food and water he gave without asking for anything in return. He had never treated her as prey, never once called her weak. He had only protected and guided. She stepped forward, trembling, not away from him but closer, standing. At his side, the soldiers shouted in shock, their weapons still aimed. She raised her voice, shaking but clear. "He is not what you told us. He is not a monster. He saved me. He fought for me. He bled for me." The clearing fell silent, her words echoing against the cliffs. The soldiers hesitated, uncertain, their training clashing with the testimony of one of their own. She stood straighter, her small body trembling, yet unbroken. "I will not leave him," she cried. "You call him a devourer, but he is a protector, and I will not betray him for your lies." The human glanced down at her, surprise flickering across his face before his expression hardened again, ready for whatever came next. The soldiers lowered their weapons, only slightly, muttering among themselves, confusion spreading through their ranks before any decision could be made. A roar split the air, raiders descending again, their ships streaking across the sky. Energy blasts raining down, chaos erupted. The soldiers scattered, firing upward as raiders swarmed into the clearing. The human seized the moment, pulling the girl behind cover as fire lit the air. She clung to him, her chest pounding, but her fear no longer of him, only of losing him in the storm of battle. He fought with everything he had, moving like a storm between raiders and soldiers alike, striking down any who came too close, his body bleeding anew, but unyielding. She could only watch, tears streaming down her face, as she realized that no story, no tale from her people had ever captured what a human truly was. Not a predator, not a monster, but something far more terrifying and far more noble. They could not be broken. They could not be turned aside. When at last the raiders retreated, leaving, smoke and silence behind the clearing was filled with the wreckage of battle. The soldiers looked at the human with new eyes, their fear mixed with respect. The girl stood at his side, her voice weak but strong enough to carry. He is not our enemy. He is proof that what we believed is wrong. Her people listened, uncertain but shaken by the sight of the human who stood bleeding yet unbowed. That night, as they found shelter again, she pressed close to him, her small body trembling with exhaustion. She whispered through tears, "I chose you and I will not turn back." He looked at her for a long time before replying quietly, "Then we will face whatever comes together." The battle with the raiders left the clearing scarred with smoke rising into the night sky and the bodies of the fallen scattered across the ground. The little alien girl sat with her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes wide as she watched the human still standing tall. Though his uniform was torn and blood marked his skin, he did not show weakness. His gaze was steady as he looked at the soldiers of her people who now stood in uneasy silence. Some lowered their weapons entirely, while others clutched them with shaking hands, unable to accept what they had seen. The commander stepped forward, his armor gleaming even in the dark, his voice harsh. "You protect this creature." He pointed at the human. "This monster who should be destroyed." The girl rose to her feet, trembling but forcing her voice to carry. "He is not a monster," she shouted, her small form dwarfed by soldiers and weapons. "He saved me from raiders. He gave me food when I was starving. He bled so I could live." The commander sneered, saying, "The human only used you, that it was in his nature to deceive and devour." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes, and cried, "No, I have seen his heart, and it is stronger than all of yours." The soldiers murmured among themselves, the weight of her words settling heavy. The human did not speak at first, but then his deep voice cut through the chaos. "Enough," he said. "You want to fear me. Then fear me, but know this, I will not harm a child. I will not harm those who do not choose war." His tone was firm, not pleading, not begging, only truth. It was the truth that silenced the crowd. The commander raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a great roar sounded overhead. Another raider ship tearing across the clouds, preparing for one last strike. The soldiers panicked, raising their rifles. But the human acted first. He pulled the girl close, shielding her as the ground shook from blasts. Then he ran forward, grabbing a discarded launcher from the battlefield. He planted his feet, braced his wounded body, and fired the missile straight into the belly of the raider. The explosion lit the sky, turning night to day as the vessel tore apart and rained fire across the hills. When the smoke cleared, the soldiers stared at him with something new in their eyes. Not hatred, not fear alone, but respect. He dropped the empty launcher, his body swaying from exhaustion, yet he still did not fall. The girl rushed to his side, clutching his arm, her small voice breaking with emotion. "You cannot leave me," she begged. "You cannot." He knelt slowly, his gaze level with hers, his voice soft. "I will not leave you, not while I can stand." The commander lowered his weapon, finally bowing his head. The soldiers followed in silence, their disbelief broken by the sight of a human who had fought not to conquer but to save the girl. Stepped forward, her voice ringing across the clearing. "This is the truth you told us humans devour, but I have walked beside one and he has done nothing but protect me. Your stories are lies and I will not live by them anymore." Her words carried farther than she could imagine, like a spark set to dry grass. The soldiers dispersed, carrying the wounded away, leaving the girl and the human alone at the edge of the firelit field. She turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks, yet her smile small and real. "For the first time I was afraid of you," she whispered. "I thought you would eat me, but you gave me hope instead." He looked at her, his eyes heavy with sorrow and strength. "You gave me something too," he said, "a reason to keep fighting." They walked away from the field together into the forest under the quiet stars, the girl still clutching his hand as though letting go would mean losing him forever. Each step forward felt like breaking chains. She no longer cared what her people whispered, or what the galaxy believed. She had seen the truth with her own eyes. Humans were not monsters. They were survivors, they were protectors, and perhaps even more than that. They were friends. As dawn rose, painting the horizon with light, the little alien girl turned to the human and said softly, "I choose you always." He gave a faint smile despite his pain, and together they stepped forward into a future neither of them could predict, but one they would face side by side, unbroken, unafraid. The sun rose, slow and golden across the horizon, casting long shadows over the land that had once been torn apart by battle. The little alien girl stood at the edge of the forest, her small hands clutching the folds of the blanket that had followed her since the day she first met the human. She looked back at the smoking hills where soldiers and raiders had clashed, where fear and hatred had nearly ended everything, and she felt the weight of what she had seen. Her people had told her that humans were nightmares given flesh, but the truth had walked beside her, carried her when she was weak, bled so she could live, and stood against death without flinching. The human stood nearby, his body scarred, his uniform torn, but his eyes steady. He watched the horizon with the quiet patience of one who had seen too many wars. Yet beneath the scars there was something she had not noticed before, not only strength but kindness hidden deep like the roots of an ancient tree. She stepped closer, her small hand reaching to grip his rough fingers. He looked down at her, and though his face remained stern, there was a softness in his gaze that told her he had found something worth protecting. Together they walked from the battlefield into the unknown, the world, ahead uncertain and dangerous, but no longer filled with the same fear she had once carried. She no longer saw him as a predator lurking in the dark, but as a shield standing between her and the chaos of the galaxy. Each step forward was proof that the stories of her people had been wrong, and that sometimes the truth could only be found by walking beside the very thing you feared. Her people might never understand, they might call her traitor or lost child, but she knew in her heart that she had chosen rightly. She had seen the truth with her own eyes, and no elder, no commander, no tale of terror could strip it away. The human was not a devourer, he was not a monster. He was something far greater. He was a protector, a survivor, and now he was hers as dawn brightened into day. The little alien girl lifted her chin and whispered softly, but clear enough for him to hear, "Wherever you go, I will follow, because I am not afraid anymore." He gave no speech in reply, only a faint smile and a gentle squeeze of her hand, and in that small gesture she felt more safety than in all the armies of her people. The galaxy might still whisper lies, but she no longer listened, because she had seen with her own eyes what a human truly was, and that truth would live in her heart forever. The end.